Our first presenter in this series on key documents is Chris Landon, and Chris is a graduate of Wabash College, and he earned a certificate in air quality management from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Chris has been a monitoring specialist with the Great Basin Unified Air Pollution Control District for 21 years. He's responsible for oversight of the district's air quality monitoring program, including the quality assurance activities for a 20-station monitoring network. He's also responsible for the PM 2.5 laboratory and documentation, including writing of the district's QAPs and the annual network plans. Chris's presentation today is entitled The Office, Episode 1, QA Laws, Regulations, and Documents. Here's Chris.
Thank you very much. I'm going to provide an introduction to QA documents and talk a little bit about key QA laws and regulations with regard to air quality monitoring. So if you're planning to nap sometime this morning, this is the time to take that opportunity because Bill will be talking about the important stuff, so you'll want to be awake for that. So you're probably saying to yourself at this point, if you have any knowledge of the air quality documentation requirements, there's so many documents and so little time. And that is so true. As a manager, determining which documents apply and where to find them is time-consuming and confusing. Field staff also need to know what documents apply, where to locate them, and who they need to contact for clarification, although this generally is not their highest priority. We know what you're thinking at this point. I may need 3 cups of coffee to get through this, and that is absolutely true. You will. First, I'm going to be introducing the key QA documents and cover key laws and regulations that are related to air quality documentation. And then Bill Chevalier is going to talk about the key documents and references that are associated with air monitoring, and he's going to talk about those in much more depth and detail. And then finally, Carissa Ganapathy of ARB will be doing the web tour, so you'll definitely want to be awake for that, because all these documents have been compiled on the ARB's website. They've put together a comprehensive web location where you can find each and every document that we talk about today. That in itself is worth the price of admission. So you might be wondering now, how do these federal, state laws and regulations relate to one another? I'm going to give you a brief explanation of the hierarchy, but you don't necessarily need to remember all these details. At the federal level, we have the Clean Air Act, which gives the government the authority to regulate air pollution. The Clean Air Act, like other laws enacted by Congress, is incorporated into the U.S. Code as Title 42, Chapter 85 of the Code of Federal Regulations. It's a set of federal laws that are implemented by the U.S. EPA through the Code of Federal Regulations. The CFR, I'm sure you're already familiar with, has many parts. The ones most relevant to air quality monitoring are, there we go, Parts 50, 53, and 58. And we're going to go through those in a little bit more detail in subsequent slides. At the state level, there's also a hierarchy of laws and regulations. In the state of California, we have the California Health and Safety Code, and the code covers many facets of state government. Specifically, Division 26 applies to air quality. These laws are implemented in the California Code of Regulations under Titles 13 and 17. And we provided summaries in your handout this morning. The handout you have there was actually assembled by the QA group from, what do you call the Quality Management Section? Yes, of the ARB. They've done a great job of synthesizing a lot of information into this one little document. So here's a bit more information about federal laws and the state hierarchy, the federal and state law hierarchy in general. Laws are general in nature and general in language. An example of that is the Clean Air Act. Regulations are then developed to implement the laws. Regulations are more prescriptive. For example, Parts 50 and 58 list the requirements for ambient air standards, PQAOs, audits, and many other issues. We also have a hierarchy of QA documents within our PQAOs. Starting off with QMP, or Quality Management Plan. Under that, we have a variety of quality assurance project or program plans. Under that, we have standard operating procedures. And within that, we have logbooks and checklists that most of the operators use each and every day running our monitoring networks. We also have documents that cover multiple districts or even individual districts, like the annual network plans. And then we have roles and responsibilities documents that are documents of who has what responsibility for what activities between the PQAO and the individual districts. Then thrown into that mix are state implementation plans, and those can either be single district, multi-district, or even cover the entire state. Thrown also into this are EPA guidance documents, which provide us the foundational material for the production of all the other QA documents. It all adds up to a lot of information to know. But, as has been mentioned before, all of this is really vital to the collection of consistent, high-quality, defensible data. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the 5 key factors utilizing common quality assurance documents in a PQAO is one of the 5 key factors. It's really important. It's a vital component that enables the PQAO to function properly. So probably by this point you're wondering, okay, why in the heck should I bother with all of this stuff? It's just a pain in the butt to have to deal with all of this documentation every single day when, as others have mentioned, I have real work to do. Well, let me give you an example. Several districts have had experiences that have shown that knowing these requirements and documenting their activities actually makes a huge difference and has a significant impact on the quality and defensibility of their data. In my own district, in 1995, we had the Owens Lake Soda Ash Company project. It was a project where a company was going to build a facility on the east side of the Owens Lake bed in order to mine the mineral that was beneath the surface. So since they were going to build this facility, they were required to conduct PSD monitoring. Contracts that the OLSAC contracted with a consulting firm, Harza Engineering. What, are we at a disco now? Woohoo! The Owens Lake Soda Ash Company contracted with a company, and I'm not trying to disparage them, but they contracted with a consulting firm named Harza Engineering. I can do this because it's all a matter of public record. Now I can't see anything, Mike. Anyway, they hired a consultant, Harza Engineering, to operate their monitoring station, which was to conduct a PSD monitoring network of one station for 1 year. They put together a comprehensive monitoring plan that was approved by Great Basin. The Great Basin then requested they submit their data quarterly for review. They chose not to accept that recommendation. Great Basin staff warned the management that the field manager had no experience whatsoever in ambient air quality monitoring. It was kind of a red flag for us. So after completion of the project, which they'd operated for 1 year, they submitted a really pretty report that looked great, and they was submitted to Great Basin, and the data and monitoring personnel reviewed it. All the data looked good with the exception of one problem. This is the way they documented their calibrations. O3 analyzer calibrated, all okay. There was no documentation of instrument response before or after a calibration. No indications of where the zero and span pots were before or after. Nothing to indicate whether any adjustments had made. So Great Basin met with the HARSA upper management to discuss the data report issue and the lack of QC data. In the end, Great Basin rejected the entire year's worth of data, and HARSA upper management agreed with the district's decision. OLSAC then fired HARSA, and they had to start over. So their project now was delayed 1 year. So what were the major issues? Well, there was a lack of training. So for those of you who don't think it's important, it is important. There was a lack of training on the part of both their field manager and their field personnel. There was a lack of documentation. And I think also, very significantly, there was a lack of oversight on the part of upper management for this project. So what have we learned from this? Having a good understanding of the laws and regulations, ensuring all of your documentation of all your activities is complete, are both critical to supporting your data. Because it is not if, but when you are involved in some form of litigation, you'll be prepared. Your data will be well documented, and it will be defensible. In my district, we have been involved in 7 legal actions or appeals over the past 4 years. We have prevailed in every instance because our data has been consistent, of high quality, and completely defensible. So what drives all of this? Well, I'm going to discuss the primary laws and regulations in a bit more detail now. There are federal and state laws and regulations, and for the Fed, we have the Clean Air Act, and this requires state implementation plans, national ambient air quality standards, and the Air Pollution Index. Our state and local monitoring, enforcement, and other air-related programs and standards have to meet federal requirements. For federal regulations, what are we doing here? The EPA promulgates the laws through the Code of Federal Regulations in Title 40, specifically relating to air quality, Parts 50, 53, and 58. Now, the state also has authority through its own laws and regulations through the California Health and Safety Code Division 26, which defines the responsibilities of the Air Resources Board and of the air districts. Also covered are stationary and mobile source emissions and ambient air quality standards. These are adopted in the California Code of Regulations, Titles 13 and 17. Title 17 pertains mostly to air quality monitoring, Title 13 to mobile sources. Under Title 40, Part 50 addresses the primary and secondary standards. Primary standards are for the protection of the public health. Secondary standards are public welfare standards for the protection of the environment and of prevention of property damage. Part 53 is federal reference and equivalent methods, and Part 58 covers QA for air quality monitoring activities. Part 58 contains the most frequently used information for air quality monitoring, and it, if it is not already, will become your Bible. Part 58 applies to everyone. There is no one who's exempt if they want to collect regulatorily acceptable data. It applies to state and local air pollution agencies like the ARB and like your own air district. It also applies to owners and operators of proposed sources, people who are doing PSD monitoring or compliance monitoring after the source is already in operation. Part 58 additionally establishes a national ambient air quality monitoring network that provides air quality data upon which to base policy decisions. It contains requirements for ambient air quality, for reporting, for the daily reporting of the Air Quality Index. It also includes QA procedures for monitor operation, for data handling, monitoring methodology, operating schedules, siting criteria for instrument probes, and a plethora of other things. Part 58 also institutes minimum network requirements that are used to provide support for monitoring that's required under state implementation plans, under national air quality assessments, and to cover policy decisions. Minimum requirements are established for network design, which includes the minimum number and placement of monitors of each type. Additionally, Part 58 includes several significantly important appendices, including Appendix A, which are the QA requirements for SLAMs, SPMs, PSD monitoring, PQAOs, which are also defined in this appendix. And it also includes measurement quality check requirements, calculations for data quality assessments, and reporting. Appendix C covers monitoring methodologies. Appendix D, network design criteria, which will be discussed in detail tomorrow. Appendix E, probe and monitoring path siting criteria, and Appendix G, the Uniform Air Quality Index. Another element of the laws and regulations are the ambient air quality standards that basically we all live by. As I mentioned before, the Federal Clean Air Act requires the establishment of national ambient air quality standards. The Act requires EPA to set outdoor or ambient standards for air pollutants. Currently, there are 6 pollutants that are referred to as the criteria pollutants. Regulation of these pollutants is implemented through Title 40 of the CFR Part 50. Additionally, under the California Health and Safety Code, California, through the Air Resources Board, has also established air quality standards for the same 6 pollutants plus 4 additional pollutants, commonly referred to as the California Air Quality Standards. These standards are typically more stringent than the federal standards. And like the CFR for the feds, California details these standards in Title 17 of the California Code of Regulations. The NACs are for the criteria pollutants, which today include carbon monoxide, lead, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, particulate matter divided into PM10 and PM2.5, and sulfur dioxide. The California Ambient Air Quality Standards, California Ambient Air Quality Standards includes those 6 pollutants plus the addition of sulfates, hydrogen sulfide, vinyl chloride, and visibility-reducing particles. These are the air quality standards that we are charged to meet. The state and federal standards are listed individually in tables in federal and state codes throughout their documents. But both are presented in this handy table, which you can find on ARB's website and in your summaries handout. This is a great table that was assembled by the ARB that puts all the standards in one place. It's the most useful tool, most useful 2-page document imaginable. So it includes the NACs primary standards, which are, as we had mentioned before, for the protection of public health. It includes secondary standards for the protection of environmental and property damage. And then it has the state ambient air quality standards too, which are a bit more stringent generally and usually have 2 separate averaging periods for each pollutant. The Clean Air Act Amendment requires states to develop a general plan for the attaining and maintaining of the national ambient air quality standards in all areas of the country. And it requires specific plans, known as state implementation plans, for the attainment of the standards in each area that each of the areas that have been designated non-attainment for one or more of the national ambient air quality standards. This example is from my own district. SIPs are generally developed by state and local agencies and then submitted to EPA for approval. Likewise, the Health and Safety Code of the State of California also requires ARB to establish and periodically review designation criteria. These designation criteria then provide the basis for the ARB to designate areas of California as attainment, non-attainment, or unclassified, which usually means there's not sufficient data to make a determination one way or the other. In my own district of Great Basin, we have 4 non-attainment areas for PM10, and thus we have 4 SIPs for achieving attainment in each of those areas. 3 of the 4 are for mitigation of wind-blown PM10 sources, and 1 is for the mitigation of wood smoke and cinder use on roadways during the winter. So if you're wondering where you can find SIPs, ARB is working on developing links on the QA webpage so that you can have access to them. And so the summary handouts have a bit more information about the SIPs as well. This concludes the introduction to key documents. Any questions? All right. Thank you for your kind attention.